They say the evil that men do will one day become their nemesis. This became true for Uncle Dominic. The same man who threw out 3 innocent girls like trash now lived in the shadow of his wickedness, begging the same earth to swallow him whole. If you haven't watched parts 1 to 4, please check the pinned comment or the video description to catch up. And let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Uncle Dominic had once ruled that mansion in Enugu like a lion. He walked through its marble corridors as if he owned the sun itself. But now, that memory was no longer his to keep. Banished from the village with disgrace hanging around his neck like a rotten chain, Dominic wandered to a forgotten settlement miles away from Nuska. There, at the edge of a dying town, he found an abandoned mud hut that even rodents had rejected. That became his new kingdom. The villagers of that small town heard whispers about him. That's the man who cursed his own blood, the one that lost everything to 3 girls. Children would point at him as he limped past, mumbling to himself, clothes torn, his once clean skin now caked with dust and filth. Nobody offered him food, nobody cared. Dominic had grown thinner than a broomstick. His eyes were sunken, beard unkempt, and his lips cracked from days without proper water. In the beginning, he tried to stay hidden, but the guilt inside him was like a ticking bomb. Each night, he would jolt awake screaming, "Ada, please forgive me," or "I didn't mean it, Nosi, I was trying to protect our legacy." The people in the village called him a madman. Some said he was cursed. Others said the spirits of the land were punishing him for what he did to his late brother's daughters. Either way, no one came close. Dominic tried to earn forgiveness from the world in strange ways. He stood outside churches on Sunday mornings, bowing and begging people to pray for him. Some spat at his feet, some ignored him entirely. But it was the children who hurt him the most. They threw stones at his roof and mocked him with songs. "Uncle without a name, your greed brought you shame." On one painful afternoon, Dominic sat under the dying shade of a pawpaw tree beside his hut. His legs trembled from hunger. His lips whispered a prayer. Not to God. He had long stopped believing in forgiveness. He prayed to the air, to the spirits, to the shadows of those girls he had wronged. "I was only trying to protect what I built," he murmured, rocking back and forth. "But I built it on pain. I built it with hate." But the more he confessed to the air, the more the silence condemned him. Meanwhile, the world had moved on. Ada, Chisum, and Nosi were no longer the crying girls begging for shelter. They had risen from the ashes he buried them in. London had become their new home, and their names echoed through newspapers and social media. The resilient sisters who overcame betrayal and reclaimed their dignity. Dominic followed their stories from afar, occasionally hearing news from distant voices in the town square. It wasn't the fame that hurt him. It was the fact that they had become everything he told them they could never be. He once called them useless. The world now called them inspirational. At night, he would stare at the ceiling of his leaking roof and scream into the darkness. "What do they have that I don't? Why did I end up here?" But no voice answered. Only the wind, whistling through the holes in the mud wall, echoed back his pain. The worst part was the loneliness. Even his kinsmen from the village never visited. Word had gone round that anyone who associated with Dominic would face the wrath of the gods. That's how much damage his past had caused. He was no longer a man. He was a warning. He tried writing a letter once, shaky handwriting on torn paper. It was addressed to the girls. But as he finished the last line, he looked at it and something inside him snapped. He tore it to pieces and fed it to the fire. "I deserve this," he whispered. By the end of the month, Dominic had become a ghost. Not dead, but invisible. He would sit on a stool outside, eyes glazed over, watching the road like a man waiting for a death that refused to come. The villagers said they heard him before they saw him. At first, it was soft humming, eerie, off-key melodies that floated from the forest edge near the abandoned hut. Then came the laughter, wild, broken laughter that sent children running and left even the goats restless. Some said it was the cry of a tortured soul. Others were convinced Dominic had finally snapped. And they were right. After weeks of isolation, hunger, and guilt, Uncle Dominic's mind began to rot like a forgotten wound. He no longer recognized the date or time. He spoke to walls. He shouted at birds. Sometimes he screamed the names of the girls, Ada, Chisum, Nosi, as though they were still little, still in the mansion, still listening. But they weren't. They had moved on. The world had embraced them, while he withered in silence. And that truth, sharp and bitter, was what broke him. One afternoon, a group of boys dared each other to go near his hut. They peeked through a cracked window and froze. Dominic sat in the middle of the room, fully naked, holding a wooden stick like a microphone. He was singing to empty chairs, pretending to host a family dinner. Chisum, pass the rice. Nosi, come and taste this goat meat. Ada, oh Ada, don't cry again. Uncle is here now. Then he paused. His eyes slowly turned toward the window, unblinking. The boys ran. One peed on himself. That day, the village agreed. Dominic had lost his mind. The madness took full control. He stopped bathing. His hair grew wild. His beard curled into knots. His body stank of waste and dry tears. Some mornings he would be seen running along the dusty road, chasing things no one else could see. Other days he'd sit under the sun and talk to a stone as if it were his late brother. "You gave birth to girls," he'd say, weeping. "I told you it would be a curse. I tried to protect your legacy. I tried, but they destroyed me instead." The stone never answered. But the worst was the nightmares. Every night he woke up screaming. In his dreams, Ada would appear, not as a child, but as a grown woman, pointing at him with fire in her eyes. "You took our home," she'd yell. Chisum would sew his mouth shut with a needle made of thorns. Nosi would sing a gospel tune that echoed like judgment through the dream. Dominic would wake up drenched in sweat, clawing at his own chest. The few villagers who still lived nearby started burning incense and sprinkling salt around their homes. "He's possessed," they whispered. "The spirits of the girl's ancestors have risen." One desperate morning, Dominic wandered into the market square, holding a dead chicken and shouting, "I've brought sacrifice! Let them leave me alone!" Market women screamed. People threw stones. He fled, slipping in the mud, his lips bleeding, still laughing. That night, under the same pawpaw tree where he once sat begging for forgiveness, Dominic did something that even shocked the spirits. He pulled out an old knife, rusted and dull, from beneath a cracked stool. The knife had once belonged to his late brother. It was meant for farming, for feeding, but in his mad hands it had become something else entirely. He looked to the sky. It was quiet, too quiet. "Maybe this is the only way," he whispered. "Maybe the girls will be free. Maybe I'll finally sleep." But he couldn't go through with it. Instead, he staggered into the bush and collapsed by the riverbank. There, in his sleep, he muttered his final confession to the moon. "I never hated them. I only hated how they reminded me of what I never became." That night, as lightning flashed across the sky, Dominic woke up screaming. But this time, there was no one to hear it. His voice echoed into the forest, into the ears of ghosts, into the arms of madness. And by morning, he had vanished. The air was strangely still that morning. A faint mist clung to the ground around the village stream, casting soft shadows through the trees. The birds that usually chirped and filled the forest with life were unusually silent. Even the rustling leaves seemed reluctant to move. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Mama Ejide, a middle-aged woman with a scarf tied tightly around her head, stepped out of her compound carrying her water pot. Her wrapper was faded from years of washing, and her feet were calloused from the countless trips to the stream. She walked the familiar path with the same rhythm she had used for decades. Step, step, adjust the pot, step. As she approached the bend near the large Iroko tree, the one villagers often avoided at night, she paused. Something didn't feel right. The path felt colder. Her heart quickened, but she shook off the unease. She pressed forward. That was when she saw it. At first, it looked like a large sack dangling from one of the thick branches. But then her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the trees. It wasn't a sack. It was a man. A rope dug into his neck, swaying slightly with the morning breeze. His feet hung lifelessly in the air. His arms, limp and pale, pointed downward. His tongue was swollen. His face was drained of all color. But she recognized him immediately. "Jesus!" she screamed, dropping her pot, which shattered on the rocks below. "Uncle Dominic!" She staggered backward, unable to pull her eyes away. For a moment, she thought maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. Maybe it wasn't him. But the worn slippers at the base of the tree were his. The torn brown shirt clinging to his chest, that was his too. The madness had ended. The man who had once been feared, then pitied, had finally taken his final step. Her scream echoed through the valley. Within minutes, the village erupted in chaos. People poured out of their homes and shops, rushing toward the stream. They came with sticks, with cutlasses, with cell phones. Children were ushered back into compounds as the elders arrived. Some gasped, some crossed themselves, others stood in silence. The village chief arrived with 2 young men who were tasked with bringing down the body. It took time. The rope had been tied tightly. Clearly, this wasn't a moment of impulse. Dominic had planned it. Every knot, every position, every detail. When his body was finally lowered, it landed with a heavy thud. People stepped back. No one wanted to touch him. Not out of fear of death, but because they didn't know what to feel. The man who had once driven his brother's daughters into the streets. The man who had laughed when little Nosy begged to stay. The man who burned the girls' inheritance and sold off their clothes, calling them useless children. That man was now lying cold beneath the tree, his face frozen in a grimace of pain and surrender. The elders gathered for an emergency meeting under the village square. There were debates on whether he should be buried in the village at all. Some said he should be thrown into the forest for the vultures. Others, more merciful, insisted on a quiet burial outside the village walls. No ceremony, no drums, no procession. By evening, a shallow grave was dug near the edge of the stream. No family came forward to claim him. No kinsman wept. Only Mama Ejide stood at a distance, her scarf pulled over her face, watching as 2 men covered the lifeless body with dry soil. One of them muttered, "May his soul find peace, if that's still possible." The other shrugged, "Let this be a warning." As the last heap of earth was placed, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, though the sky was still clear. And just like that, the story of Uncle Dominic came to an end. Not with justice, not with forgiveness, but with silence and shame. The mansion he once stole had been reclaimed. The girls he once threw away had risen beyond what anyone imagined. And he, once the feared man of the family, was now just a name whispered with pity and caution. The village slowly returned to life, but that tree, that cursed Iroko tree, would never be the same. Mothers would point at it and tell their children, "That's where greed met its bitter end."